Hi everyone. Today I'm going to have a look at Grade 1 theory as a second part of the overview that I did a few months ago. We might tackle another important area of theory, and that is rhythm, because in Grade 1 you are introduced to the main notes and the way they form rhythms and time signatures, and a lot of people can find it a bit confusing, so let's see if we can work through and understand what we need to know for Grade 1. That's what's AMEB Grade 1, but this will be relevant for all elementary theory systems. So, we are introduced to the types of notes we use. These are the symbols that we use that represent different types of notes. There's two aspects of a note. There's where the note is placed, whether it's an A, B, or a C, or a D, E, F, G. But then the particular type of symbol tells us how long the note lasts for. So here is a little breakdown of all the notes we use. We have this first semicircle symbol, which you'll notice we call a semibreve. Now, a semibreve is obviously half of a breve. This has a very long history to it, and as time has gone on, as the centuries have gone on, more to the point, we've gravitated towards note values of smaller value. So we kind of ditched breves. Somehow in our non-relative brain, we thought they lasted for too long and thought they were a bit boring. So we kind of gravitated towards this semi-breve, which you'll notice we have named here as a whole note. So these are more modern descriptions of these older Latin terms. So this one's called a semi-breve. And then what we have is here the semibreve divided into two minims. So this minim lasts half as long as this semibreve. So for the same amount of time, we would need two semibreves to make up, the two minims to make up the semibreve. In a similar way, a crotchet here is half as long as a minim. So it takes two crotchets to form the same length of time as a minim. And obviously, the crotchet, therefore, is a quarter of the original semibreve. And then the quaver is an eighth of the original semibreve. And obviously a quaver is half of a crotchet, so it takes two quavers for the same length of time as a crotchet. So these are the types of notes we use, and you can see that they have a proportional relationship with each other. They're all half as long as each other. So that gives us a variety of timings, of durations, we might use the term. Now, you might be wondering, if you look over here, I've said that a semibreve equals 4 crotchets, a minim equals 2 crotchets, and a crotchet equals 1 crotchet, and a quaver equals half a crotchet. So the crotchet in our modern times has become the default single value note. It doesn't have to be. You can have crotchet beats if you want. You can have minim beats if you want. You can have semibreve beats. But the crotchet is so common. So because it's the common starting point, we make the crotchet the beat, and so we say it is equal to 1 beat. Therefore, See, now we have an orientation to how this is worked out. If the crotchet is 1 beat, then the minim becomes 2 crotchet beats. And if the crotchet is 1 beat, the semibreve becomes 4 crotchet beats. And of course, the quaver is half a crotchet beat. So we take the crotchet as the beat, and you can see how these notes are now in proportion to each other. So here is the semibreve that lasts for the same amount of time as the 4 crotchets, and the 2 minims lasts the same time as the 4 crotchets, and the 8 semiquavers lasts the same time as 4 crotchets. Now, just so that you understand, the quavers can sometimes be presented with beams or without beams. Normally within a time signature we do use beams, but we will cover a bit more of that later on. All right, so they are the basic notes that we use. Now, how do we put together our time signatures? All right, let's see if we can play around with this a little bit so that we understand it a bit more. What is a time signature? Well, what we do is we group beats together in a certain number of beats. So, for example, we could have a group of 4 beats. So I can have 4 crotchets here. Hopefully my little descriptions here won't go crazy. There's 4 crotchets. Or I could have, so we call that 1 bar. Or I could have 3 crotchets in a bar. I could have a group of 3 crotchets. And I could also have a group of 2 crotchets. Okay, so you could have 1 crotchet, that would be 1 4. You can have 5 crotchets in a bar. You can have as many crotchets in a bar as you like. Of course, it can become not very practical. So the common time signatures that we use, 4 4, 3 4, and 2 4. That covers most of the simple ones, and it covers what you're going to be learning in grade 1 theory. So here we have 4 4. You've probably seen that when you look at a sheet of music. What does the top number tell us, and what does the bottom number tell us? All right, well, this will be a little bit of a revision. So the top number is a number. So it tells you how much of something. How many beats are there in the bar? That's what the top number is telling you. The bottom number is not a number. If you think of it as a number, you just get confused. So, some people try to describe it as a denominator. Words like that just go over the heads of people trying to learn theory for the first time. So I tend to describe this in a way that helps people understand it a bit better. So the bottom number, I say to students, is not a number. And they look at me going, what? But it is a number. Well, it's not really. The bottom number is a nickname. It's a name. It's not a number. It's a name. It's telling you what type of note you're counting. What are you counting? You could be counting anything. You can count anything in this world. You can count crotchets. You could count minims. You could count sheep. You could count the red cars that go by. You can count all sorts of things. So the 4 is telling us it is a nickname for crotchet because there are 4 crotchets in a whole note, in a semibreve, right? And so how many notes there are in a semibreve determines the nickname we give to the type of note. So a crotchet is a 4, right? A quaver is an 8, and a minim is a 2. So 2 is the nickname for minim. So, I guess it'd be like if you're a football player and you have a jersey and you have a number on the back, you become identified by that number. It is mathematical in the sense that it's based on the division from a whole note, but the numbers become an identifier for the type of note. Right? That's the bottom line, and that will sort of help you to understand it, right? Because I think, let's see if I can draw a little picture here. If I put a crotchet there, right, and then let me get a 4. Let me type a 4. And I'll put it on top. Okay. So there you go. So if let's make that a bit bigger and look like the others, I think. There we go. So this is what it's telling you. 4 crotchets. Now, wouldn't it be easy if we just used the crotchet symbol rather than a secret number? I think I'm onto something here. If we used a crotchet here to represent the 4, instead of the 4 representing the crotchet, everyone would understand. And that would be one layer of teaching we never have to do. 4 crotchets in a bar. And then everybody would understand. You can see over here in 3/4, that's 3 crotchets in a bar. And here the 2 is 2 crotchets in a bar. The bottom number means crotchet. It's a name for crotchet. So hopefully that's given some explanation for that. And if you can get hold of that, then understanding time signatures will be so much easier. There's no other mystery about it other than that. All right, so now what's important to understand is what type of notes that we can use, because we can use different combinations of notes. For example, I could have a crotchet. I could take this third crotchet here and I could turn it into 2 quavers. So you can see now in this 4/4 bar, I've changed it. We have a crotchet, and instead of the third crotchet, we are going to have 2 quavers, because 2 quavers equals a crotchet from our description before, right? So there's different possibilities. I could turn all of these into quavers, right? Because you can see the beams here. These are called beams, the bar that kind of goes across there. So you can see these beams are showing us, normally there'd be 3 crotchet beats in this bar. Supposed to be 3 crotchet beats in this bar. But I've now created a rhythm using quavers. So for every crotchet beat, I've put 2 quavers, because 2 quavers equals a crotchet. So each quaver is a half, and a half plus a half equals 1. All right, that's because we're counting crotchets, because we've got the 4 on the bottom. Okay, so now we could use a minim. I could make this first bar here have a minim. So a minim and then 2 quavers and a crotchet. Now, the only thing you need to watch is, see, I could have 2 minims here in this 4/4 bar. That works well because the first minim is 2 crotchet beats. The second minim is 2 crotchet beats. So together they make 4. All right. Now, there's some things you can't do. And here's something you're not allowed to do. You're not allowed to place the minim on the second beat of the bar. Okay. So when you're learning to do rhythm for the first time, you're not allowed to place the minim on what we call a weak beat. So if we go back to 4/4 with crotchets, okay, this is known as a strong beat. We'll put an S for strong. This is known as a weak beat. The third beat is strong and the fourth beat is weak. So one thing we learn about rhythm is strong and weak. So one thing you need to remember is you can't take the crotchet on a weak beat and turn it into a minim. So that's a no-no. So you need to keep the right notes to the strong and weak beats. Okay, so now we've looked at the types of notes. Now another thing we need to consider is sometimes the composer needs to tell the musician to not play for a certain length of time. So we need what we call rests. So now we can find out what the rests are. So you see my semi-breve up here. Well, I'm going to hit the magic rest button and we'll see what sort of rest. There it is. The semi-breve rest is a little square box that hangs off the second top line, right? So that's a semi-breve rest. Now you'll notice here it's sitting on this left because I turned the semi-breve into a rest. A semi-breve rest can also, where's some more manuscript? Here we go, let's bring this up here. You'll see all of these. They are semi-breve rests too. A semi-breve rest can also be what we call a whole bar rest. A whole bar rest. So in other words, there's nothing happening in this bar. So sometimes, regardless of the time signature, if it's 3/4 or 2/4, right? So for example, I could have a 2/4 bar. Let's get a 2/4 bar, right? And the whole bar rest will still look like a semi-breve rest. So we just use the same type of rest regardless of what the time signature is. And it just means there is nothing happening in this bar. Okay, but we have other types of rests. So for example, minim. What does a minim rest look like? Let's hit the magic rest button. Aha! It's a square box too, just like the whole bar rest, except it sits on the middle line, right? So the semi-breve rest hangs off the second top line. The minim rest sits on the middle line, okay? All right, let's have a look at the crotchet. What's the crotchet rest? So just to back up here, so a semi-breve rest means that you are silent for 4 beats. A minim rest means you don't do anything. You're also silent for 2 beats. Now, a crotchet rest, let's hit, there it is. So it's the hard one to draw. It's the squiggly, vertical, squiggly, scraggly line. That means to rest, be silent, don't do anything for 1 whole beat. And let's look at the quaver rest. Let's hit the rest button. Yes, a slightly easier one to copy. Little dot drawn out and then an angular line extending down. All right, so they're your rests that you need to be able to learn as well. So, for example, I could say, well, actually, the computer will do it for you. But if I put a crotchet into that 2/4 bar, you can see it's brought up a crotchet rest to complete the bar. Right? If I had a, let's see, if I had a 4/4 bar, and I'll put a crotchet in there. There we go. And the computer has added this up for us. After the crotchet, we have a crotchet rest that makes the second crotchet, and then we have a minim rest, and the minim equals 2 crotchets. So there's 1, 2, 3, and 4. So that adds up to 4 beats. So whatever amount of notes and rests you place into a bar, it must add up to the number of beats in the bar. And you must use the least number of rests. So, for example, you can't do this. There's no point in doing that. You always try to complete with the least number of rests. Now, in a 4/4 bar, you could have the crotchet and then the 3 crotchet rests, but after the third beat, which is a strong beat, we can put a minim rest, and it makes it a lot neater to see it that way. And then when the musician is playing, they can see the first crotchet on the first beat, they can see the second weak beat crotchet, and then they can see the minim rest on the third and the fourth beats. All right, so that's a little introduction to how time signatures work and how the notes work. So hopefully, if you work through the lessons in the theory books, you'll be able to know what you're doing. You'll be able to complete them. Okay, hope this helps. We'll see you next time.